Omega pulled a wolf pup from the hunt and hid him, and the next morning the Alpha King came to claim. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. Emily Carter had learned how to stand very still, the kind of stillness that made people forget you were there at all. And on the morning of the hunt, that skill mattered more than ever. The forest on the eastern edge of the pack territory breathed around her, cool and damp, pine needles soft under worn boots, as distant horns signaled the start of the chase. Emily stayed near the boundary like she had been told, a white-skinned Omega in a faded jacket, hands tucked into her sleeves to keep them from shaking. She wasn't part of the hunt, not really. Omegas never were. Her task was simple and humiliating in its own quiet way. Watch the perimeter, report nothing, touch nothing, and stay out of sight. The air carried sharp scents of earth and movement, and beneath it all, a nervous energy that made her heart beat faster than it should have. She focused on counting her breaths, the way she always did when the world felt too loud. Then she heard it, a sound so small it almost vanished beneath the echoes of the horns, a thin, broken whimper that didn't belong to the confident rhythm of the hunt. Emily froze. She told herself it was nothing, that fear played tricks on people like her. But the sound came again, closer this time, and her feet moved before her mind could stop them. A few yards into the brush, she saw him, a wolf pup no bigger than a house cat. Pale fur darkened with dirt, one tiny paw caught where the ground dipped and tangled with roots. His eyes were wide, more confusion than fear, and when he tried to pull free, he only tired himself more. Emily's chest tightened. Rules pressed against her thoughts, sharp and clear. But something quieter pressed back, steady and warm. She knelt, ignoring the damp cold seeping into her jeans, and whispered softly, words meant to calm more than explain. Her hands were gentle as she eased the roots aside, lifting him free inch by careful inch until he was cradled against her coat. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, voices shifted direction, boots crunching leaves as the hunt moved closer, and Emily knew she had only moments. She tucked the pup inside her jacket, feeling his small heartbeat against her own, and slipped toward the old storage shed near the boundary fence, a place everyone ignored because nothing important had ever happened there. She settled into the shadows, back against weathered wood, breathing slow, listening as the sounds passed and faded. The pup relaxed, trusting in a way that made her throat ache, and without understanding why, Emily felt a warmth spread through her palms, not a light anyone could see, just a quiet reassurance that he was safe for now. She stayed there until the forest returned to normal, until the horns fell silent, and the world pretended nothing unusual had happened. Emily didn't know that high above the treeline, a presence had paused, attention drawn not by the hunt, but by a single act of mercy, and she certainly didn't know that by morning, the Alpha King would stand at her door, ready to claim the Omega who had chosen compassion when no one was watching. Emily stayed hidden until the forest fully settled, until the distant sounds of the pack drifted back toward the main grounds and the tension in the air slowly thinned. Only then did she allow herself to move, easing out from the shadows with careful steps, as if the ground itself might betray her. The wolf pup shifted inside her jacket, warm and alive, his small body pressed against her ribs as though he instinctively knew she was his shelter now. Emily kept her head down as she crossed the narrow path toward her cabin, a weathered structure no larger than 400 square feet, tucked so far from the center of the pack that most wolves forgot it existed. That had always been the point. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of dried herbs and old wood. Emily closed the door gently and set a lantern on the table, keeping the flame low. She slipped out of her jacket and placed the pup on a folded blanket near the fireplace, watching closely as he curled in on himself, breathing steady, eyes fluttering shut like a child exhausted from fear. Relief washed through her so strongly that she had to sit down, one hand pressed to her chest to slow her heartbeat. She told herself she would only keep him through the night, just until he was strong enough to run. but the thought felt thin and unconvincing even as it formed. She fetched a shallow bowl of water, dipping her fingers in before touching his paw again, careful and slow. The warmth returned, subtle but undeniable, spreading from her palms into her arms, and she swallowed hard, unsure whether to be frightened or grateful. By the time the lantern burned low, the pup slept deeply, his breathing even, his small side rising and falling against the blanket. Emily lay awake on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the night sounds outside. Every distant footstep made her tense. Every shift of wind against the walls sent her heart racing. She had broken pack law. She knew that. Omegas did not interfere with hunts. Omegas did not hide wolves. Omegas did not make choices that mattered. Dawn came quietly, pale light seeping through the small window as the forest woke again. Emily rose before the bell rang, moving quickly to check on the pup, only to find him awake and alert, watching her with eyes far too aware for something so young. He made a soft sound, almost questioning, and Emily felt something inside her soften in response. She crouched beside him, whispering reassurances she did not fully believe herself, when a sudden pressure swept through the air outside, heavy and commanding, like a storm arriving without warning. Emily froze. The pup lifted his head, ears pricking, and she felt it then, a presence so strong it made her knees weak, a dominance that pressed through the cabin walls and into her bones. Boots crunched on gravel outside. Not many. Measured. Deliberate. Emily's breath caught as a knock sounded at her door, firm but controlled, not a demand, not yet. She stood slowly, heart pounding, every instinct telling her that whatever waited on the other side would change everything. She reached the door, fingers trembling as she rested her hand against the wood, the pup silent behind her, and in that suspended moment before she opened it, Emily understood with sudden clarity that the forest had not forgotten her kindness, and that the world she had lived quietly on the edges of was about to look directly at her for the first time. Emily opened the door slowly, the hinges whispering as morning light spilled across the worn floorboards, and the man standing outside made the small world she knew feel suddenly and unmistakably smaller. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that looked too refined for the rough edge of the territory, and the air around him carried a calm authority that did not need to announce itself. His eyes were a cool gray, steady and observant, and when they settled on Emily, it felt less like being judged and more like being seen, fully and without illusion. She swallowed, forcing her shoulders back, aware of her bare feet on the cold floor and the thin sweater she had pulled on in haste. Behind him stood two guards at a respectful distance, silent and still, their attention outward rather than on her, as if the man at the door required no reinforcement. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and even, the kind of voice that did not rush and never needed to repeat itself. Emily nodded, words momentarily lost to the pounding of her heart. "I apologize for arriving without notice," he continued, though his tone suggested he had never truly doubted his welcome. "I am looking for something that passed through this part of the forest last night." His gaze shifted briefly past her shoulder, toward the dim interior of the cabin, and Emily felt a spark of instinctive fear flare in her chest. She stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking the view without fully understanding why, her hands curling into loose fists at her sides. "I have not seen anyone," she said quietly, choosing honesty in tone if not in content. The man studied her for a moment longer, and then, to her surprise, his expression softened, just enough to matter. "You are Emily Carter," he said, not a question. The sound of her name on his lips made her pulse jump. "Yes, sir," she replied automatically, the old habits of deference rising unbidden. He inclined his head, acknowledging her without encouraging the title. "I know who you are, and I know where you live," he said calmly. "I also know what you did yesterday, at the edge of the hunt." Emily's breath caught, and for a brief second she considered denying it, but the look in his eyes told her it would be pointless. She straightened instead, lifting her chin in a small, stubborn gesture. "I did not mean to cause trouble," she said. He held up one hand, stopping her gently. "You caused no trouble," he replied. Quite the opposite. As if summoned by his words, a soft sound came from behind her, a small, curious noise that made the man's attention sharpen instantly. Emily did not turn around, but she felt the shift in the air, felt something align, click into place. The man exhaled slowly, a controlled breath that carried relief beneath its restraint. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice respectful now, deliberate. Emily hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. He entered the cabin with measured steps, taking in the simple space without comment, his focus drawn unerringly to the wolf pup near the hearth. The pup lifted his head, tail flicking once, recognition clear in his bright eyes. The man knelt without hesitation, lowering himself to the pup's level, and something in Emily's chest eased at the care in his movement. "Thank you," he said softly, not to the pup, but to her. "For seeing him. For choosing him." Emily stood frozen, watching as the most powerful presence she had ever felt rested a gentle hand near the small wolf, his expression unreadable but intent. She did not yet understand the full weight of the moment, did not yet know his name or title, but as he rose to face her again, eyes steady and voice certain, Emily felt the quiet certainty settle deep within her bones that her life had just crossed a threshold from which there was no returning. The man remained still for a moment, as if giving the quiet space time to adjust to him. Then he rose smoothly to his feet, and finally met Emily's eyes again, not as an intruder or an authority, but as someone who had made a deliberate choice. "My name is Nathaniel Blackwood," he said, his voice steady and unadorned, and the name itself seemed to carry weight, settling into the small cabin like a truth that could not be ignored. Emily's breath caught, recognition striking her a heartbeat too late, and she felt the world tilt as understanding rushed in. The Alpha King. The realization should have driven her to her knees, should have filled her with fear, but instead she found herself rooted in place, her thoughts fixed on the wolf pup who had shifted closer to her legs, instinctively seeking her. Nathaniel noticed the movement, a faint curve of something like relief passing through his expression. "He is my son," he said simply, the words spoken without pride or drama, only certainty. Emily's hand moved without permission, resting lightly against the edge of the table to steady herself. "I did not know," she whispered, though it felt like an inadequate thing to say. "I know," Nathaniel replied, "and that is why this matters." He turned slightly, gesturing for the guards to remain outside, and when the door closed behind them, the cabin felt quieter still, insulated from the rest of the world. He explained then, not in long speeches, but in careful truths, that the pup had slipped away during preparations for the hunt, curious and fearless in the way only the very young could be, that tracking him had led Nathaniel through the night, and into the territory where Emily lived unseen. "I followed his trail," Nathaniel said, "but it was your choice that changed the outcome." Emily listened, heart pounding, as he spoke of laws and expectations without reciting them, of how easily the pup could have been dismissed as nothing more than an animal in the wrong place at the wrong time. She understood then the risk she had taken, and the deeper risk she had not even known existed. "I am an Omega," she said quietly, not as an apology, but as a statement of fact. Nathaniel met her gaze without hesitation. "I am aware," he replied. The room held that truth between them, and Emily waited for the judgment she had learned to expect, the polite dismissal or the cold correction. It did not come. Instead, Nathaniel continued, "You acted when others would not. You protected what was vulnerable without knowing who he belonged to or what it might cost you. That is not weakness." Emily's throat tightened, emotion rising unexpectedly, and she looked down, uncomfortable with the attention, with the idea that her small act could be seen as anything more than instinct. Nathaniel stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, his presence warm but controlled. "I cannot undo what you have already done," he said, "and I would not if I could. There are consequences to choices like yours, but there is also recognition." He paused, allowing the meaning to settle, then added, "I will not take him from you today." Emily looked up sharply, disbelief flashing across her face. "He has bonded to you," Nathaniel explained calmly, "and bonds like that should not be broken without cause. My son will return with me soon enough, but not before he is ready." A small sound escaped Emily's chest, something between relief and awe, and she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling too small again, but sincere. Nathaniel inclined his head, accepting them, then straightened, his gaze turning thoughtful as it rested on her once more. "This is not the end of our meeting, Emily Carter," he said. "It is the beginning of a conversation that should have happened long ago." And as he turned toward the door, leaving behind a cabin that no longer felt invisible, Emily understood that the quiet life she had known was already slipping away, replaced by something uncertain, powerful, and impossible to ignore. The cabin felt different after Nathaniel left, as if the air itself remembered his presence, and Emily moved through the small space with careful steps, trying to anchor herself in familiar routines. She fed the pup small portions, measured and gentle, and watched as his strength returned in quiet increments, his movements steadier, his eyes brighter each hour. Yet beyond the thin walls, the territory stirred with unease. By midday, distant voices carried farther than they should have, and Emily sensed the shift before she understood it. News traveled quickly in packs, and curiosity was rarely kind. A knock came in the early afternoon, lighter than the one that had announced the Alpha King, but no less unsettling. When Emily opened the door, she found Mara, a beta woman from the inner grounds, standing stiffly with her arms crossed, eyes flicking past Emily toward the interior. "There are questions," Mara said without greeting. "About the hunt. About what was seen near the boundary." Emily nodded, her pulse quickening. "I did what I thought was right," she replied, keeping her voice calm. Mara's expression tightened, something like discomfort crossing her face. "Right is not always safe," she said quietly. "The council is restless. They do not like surprises, especially ones involving omegas." Before Emily could respond, Mara stepped back, lowering her voice. "The Alpha King has ordered discretion," she added. "That is the only reason you are still standing here unchallenged. Do not mistake silence for forgiveness." With that, she turned and left, her footsteps fading quickly. Emily closed the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly until the shaking in her hands eased. The pup pressed against her ankle, grounding her, and she knelt to rest her forehead briefly against the rough wood, allowing herself a moment of fear she could not show anyone else. As the afternoon stretched on, the weight of what was coming grew heavier. She could feel it, a pull she did not have words for, like the forest itself was nudging her towards something inevitable. When evening approached, the sound of approaching riders reached her ears again, and this time, she did not hide. Nathaniel returned alone, his presence announced not by guards, but by the quiet certainty that seemed to precede him wherever he went. He found Emily standing outside the cabin, shoulders squared, the pup at her side, half shifted now into a small wolf with unsteady legs. Nathaniel's gaze softened at the sight, but his expression remained serious. "The council will not wait long," he said, getting straight to the truth. "They fear what they do not control, and your choice has reminded them that control is an illusion." Emily nodded, having suspected as much. "What happens now?" she asked. Nathaniel considered her for a moment, measuring not her rank, but her resolve. "You will come with me to the citadel," he said. "Not as a prisoner, as my guest. Murmurs will follow you whether you stay or go, but under my roof, no one will touch you without answering to me." The words sent a shiver through her, equal parts fear and relief. "I am just an omega," Emily said softly. Nathaniel met her gaze, unwavering. "You are the omega who chose compassion when it mattered," he replied. "That makes you visible in a way you have never been before." The pup let out a small sound, pressing closer to her, and Emily looked down, then back up, decision settling in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. "All right," she said. Nathaniel inclined his head, a gesture of respect rather than command. "We leave at first light," he said. "Tonight, rest. Tomorrow, everything changes." As he turned away once more, Emily watched the forest darken around her cabin, understanding at last that the edges she had lived on were gone, and that stepping forward was no longer a choice she could avoid. Emily did not sleep much that night, but it was not fear that kept her awake. It was awareness, a quiet hum beneath her skin that had never been there before. She packed what little she owned into a small canvas bag, folding clothes with deliberate care, touching each familiar item as if to reassure herself that she was still the same person who had woken up that morning. The pup stayed close, shadowing her movements, occasionally shifting clumsily between wolf and human form in a way that was more endearing than alarming. Just before dawn, a soft knock came at the door, and when Emily stepped outside, the forest was wrapped in pale blue light, cool and still. Nathaniel waited beside a dark vehicle parked at the edge of the path, not ornate or imposing, just practical and well-kept, a reflection of restraint rather than display. He greeted her with a nod, his gaze briefly checking her expression, her posture, as if making sure she was ready for what came next. The journey began quietly, the road winding through familiar woods that slowly gave way to broader paths and open land. Emily watched the scenery change, noting how the air felt different farther from the pack boundaries, lighter somehow, less heavy with expectation. Nathaniel drove without hurry, allowing the silence to stretch comfortably between them. After several miles, he spoke, his voice measured. "You should know what awaits you," he said. "Not to frighten you, but to prepare you." Emily nodded, hands folded in her lap. "The citadel is not unkind," he continued, "but it is observant. People will look at you and try to decide who you are before you speak. Do not let them decide for you." Emily absorbed his words, recognizing the advice beneath the warning. "I have spent my whole life being decided for," she replied softly. Nathaniel glanced at her, something thoughtful passing through his eyes. "Then it is time that changed," he said. When the citadel finally came into view, rising from the landscape with quiet strength rather than towering menace, Emily felt her breath catch. It was larger than anything she had known, built of stone and glass that reflected the early light, surrounded by grounds that seemed both orderly and alive. As they approached, attendants moved efficiently, their attention drawn immediately to Nathaniel, then flickering to Emily with curiosity that was carefully masked by professionalism. She stayed close to him, not because she was told to, but because his presence steadied her. Inside, the citadel was calm, voices low, footsteps measured, the air carrying a sense of balance rather than tension. Nathaniel guided her through corridors that opened into a sunlit room overlooking a garden, simple but elegant. "This will be yours for now," he said. "No one will enter without your permission." Emily set her bag down slowly, taking in the space, the quiet promise of privacy. "Thank you," she said, meeting his gaze. He inclined his head, then paused, his expression shifting slightly, more serious. "There is something else," he said. "The bond you formed with my son is unusual, not unheard of, but rare. It speaks to something in you that has been overlooked." Emily frowned, unsure. "I did not do anything special," she said. Nathaniel shook his head gently. "You did what was right without needing recognition. That is special enough." He hesitated, then added, "You will be invited to observe the council this evening. You are not required to speak, but your presence will be noted." Emily felt a ripple of nerves at the thought, but she straightened, resolve settling in her chest. "I will be there," she said. Nathaniel smiled faintly, the expression brief but genuine. "Rest now," he replied. "You have already stepped into a larger story than you realize." As he left her alone in the quiet room, Emily moved to the window, watching the garden below, the world opening wider with each passing moment, and for the first time, she did not feel small within it. As evening approached, the citadel shifted in subtle ways, light dimming through tall windows as lanterns were lit one by one, casting a warm glow along the corridors. Emily prepared carefully, choosing simple, clean clothes provided to her, nothing ornate, nothing that tried to make her appear other than what she was. When a quiet knock sounded, she opened the door to find an attendant waiting to escort her, expression neutral but not unkind. The walk to the council chamber felt longer than it was, each step echoing softly against stone floors, each breath reminding her that she did not belong to the world that built such spaces, yet was standing within it all the same. The chamber itself was wide and circular, with a long table of polished wood and seats arranged with deliberate symmetry. Members of the council were already present, their conversations low and controlled, eyes lifting one by one as Emily entered. She felt their attention settle on her like weight, not crushing, but insistent. Nathaniel stood at the head of the table, posture relaxed yet unmistakably authoritative, and when his gaze met hers, the smallest nod grounded her. Emily took the seat indicated for her, slightly apart from the others, not hidden, not centered, simply present. The council began without ceremony. Voices measured as matters of territory, resources, and protocol were discussed. Emily listened, absorbing the rhythms of power, the careful balance of agreement and dissent, noting how often her presence caused words to pause or shift. Eventually, one of the elders turned toward Nathaniel, expression sharp with restrained concern. "The omega from the boundary," he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either, represents an irregularity. Bonds formed outside of order invite instability. Emily felt the familiar urge to shrink, to make herself smaller, but she remained still, hands folded, eyes forward. Nathaniel did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, then spoke calmly. "Stability is not maintained by ignoring compassion," he replied. "It is maintained by recognizing it." Another council member leaned forward. "If every omega acted on impulse, chaos would follow," she said. Emily's chest tightened, but before she could think better of it, she spoke, her voice quiet yet steady. "I did not act on impulse," she said. "I acted because someone needed help." The room stilled. Emily felt every gaze turn to her fully now, and she held her ground, heart racing but resolve firm. "I did not know who he was," she continued. "I did not know it would matter. I only knew it was wrong to walk away." The elder studied her, something thoughtful flickering across his features. Nathaniel watched her closely, expression unreadable, but there was approval in his eyes. After a moment, he addressed the council again. "This is why she is here," he said. "Not to disrupt, but to remind us that our laws were built to protect life, not dismiss it." The discussion continued, but the tone had changed. Emily was no longer an unspoken question. She was a presence acknowledged, a factor considered. When the meeting concluded, members rose with polite nods, some glancing at Emily with curiosity rather than judgment. As the chamber emptied, Nathaniel approached her. "You spoke well," he said quietly. Emily exhaled, tension easing from her shoulders. "I was afraid I had overstepped," she admitted. Nathaniel shook his head. "You stepped forward," he corrected. "There is a difference." He paused, then added, "Many will resist change, but they will remember tonight. They will remember you." Emily looked around the now quiet chamber, understanding settling in slowly. For the first time, her voice had been heard where it mattered, not because she was commanded to speak, but because she chose to. As she followed Nathaniel back through the softly lit corridors, the citadel no longer felt like an overwhelming structure of stone and power, but a place where something new had begun to take root, and she sensed that whatever awaited her next would demand even more courage than she had already found within herself. The night after the council passed quietly, but sleep did not come easily to Emily, her thoughts turning over the words spoken, the looks exchanged, the way the room had shifted when she chose to speak. Morning light found her awake by the window, watching the garden stir as staff moved through their routines with practiced calm. The wolf pup, now steady enough to trot confidently, lay curled near her feet, tail flicking in his sleep. When a soft knock came, Emily was ready. Nathaniel waited outside, his expression composed, but there was a gravity to his presence that told her this meeting would be different. "Walk with me," he said, and she fell into step beside him as they moved through the grounds, the air cool and fresh. They passed fountains and stone paths, the citadel rising behind them like a watchful presence, until they reached a quiet overlook where the land stretched wide and open. Nathaniel stopped there, resting his hands lightly on the stone railing. "There are traditions I have avoided explaining until now," he said. "Not because you are unworthy of the truth, but because truth carries weight." Emily nodded, sensing what was coming, her pulse steady but alert. "The bond you formed was not accidental," he continued. "It was not simply kindness recognized by chance. Some connections are rare, formed when intention and instinct align." Emily swallowed. "Are you saying it means something more?" she asked. Nathaniel turned to face her fully, his gaze direct, but not overwhelming. "I am saying that the pack will interpret it as such," he replied. "And more importantly, so will I." Emily searched his expression, looking for command or expectation, but found neither. Only choice. "I will not claim you by decree," he said quietly. "That path exists, but it is not one I will take. If you stay, it must be because you choose to, with full understanding of what it entails." Emily exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. "And if I do not choose it," she asked. "Then you will leave here under my protection," Nathaniel said. "No harm will come to you. Your life will remain your own." The honesty in his words steadied her, grounding her more than any promise of power could have. She looked out over the land, thinking of the small cabin she had called home, of the quiet life she had accepted without question, of how quickly it had all changed. "I never wanted a matter like this," she admitted softly. Nathaniel nodded. "Few who do are worthy of it," he replied. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Finally, Emily met his gaze again. "I do not know what the future looks like," she said. "I only know that walking away now would feel like pretending none of this happened. That I did not happen." Nathaniel watched her carefully, then inclined his head, respect clear in the gesture. "Then you understand enough," he said. "Word will spread today," he added. "I will not stop it. By sunset, the pack will know that the Omega who protected my son stands under my acknowledgement." Emily felt a shiver run through her, anticipation and uncertainty entwined. "I am afraid," she said honestly. Nathaniel's voice softened. "Courage does not require the absence of fear," he said. "It requires choosing despite it." As they turned back toward the citadel, Emily felt the world leaning toward her, expectations forming, paths narrowing, and yet within that pressure, she also felt something solid and steady taking shape. Whatever came next would not be quiet, and it would not be invisible. And as the day unfolded around her, Emily understood that by nightfall, her place in the story would no longer be a question left unanswered. The announcement came at dusk, carried not by trumpets or spectacle, but by presence, as members of the pack gathered naturally in the great hall, drawn by instinct more than summons. Emily stood near the edge at first, the familiar pull to remain unseen tugging at her, but Nathaniel's quiet gesture brought her forward until she stood beside him, not behind. The room settled, conversations fading as attention aligned, and Emily felt the weight of hundreds of eyes without flinching away. Nathaniel spoke clearly, his voice steady and calm, filling the space without effort. "You know why you are here," he said. "You have heard fragments, assumptions, and interpretations. I will give you truth." He turned slightly toward Emily, not presenting her as an object, but acknowledging her as a person. "This Omega acted without knowledge of rank or reward. She protected my son because it was right, not because it was safe." A murmur rippled through the hall, surprise and reconsideration moving together. Emily kept her chin level, heart steady, grounding herself in the simple fact that she had nothing to take back. Nathaniel continued, "The bond that formed was recognized by me and will be honored, not as tradition demands, but as integrity requires." He paused, then did something no one expected. He stepped down from the raised platform until he stood level with Emily, reducing the distance that symbolized authority. "I will not command her future," he said. "I will stand with her if she chooses to stand with me." Silence followed, deep and complete, and in that quiet, Emily felt the choice crystallize within her, not pressured, not rushed, simply clear. She took a breath and spoke, her voice carrying further than she thought it would. "I did not come here to be elevated," she said. "I came because leaving felt like denying who I am. I choose to stay, not because I was asked, but because I believe this place can be better than it was yesterday." The hall remained silent for a heartbeat. Then something shifted, subtle but unmistakable, as acceptance replaced resistance in ways no decree could force. Nathaniel reached out, not grasping, not claiming, but offering his hand. Emily placed hers in his, feeling warmth and steadiness. Nothing overwhelming, nothing consuming, just connection rooted in respect. "By my authority and my will," Nathaniel said, "I acknowledge Emily Carter as one who stands under my protection and beside my purpose." The words settled into the stone and wood of the hall, binding not through dominance, but through recognition. When the gathering dispersed, Emily found herself alone with Nathaniel on the balcony overlooking the grounds, the night air cool and calm. "You could still walk away," he said quietly. Emily smiled faintly, looking out at the lights below. "I know," she replied, "but I am not lost anymore." Nathaniel nodded, satisfaction tempered by humility. "Then we begin here," he said, "not as legend, not as command, but as two people who chose differently when it mattered." As the moon rose over the citadel, casting silver across the land, Emily felt the final piece settle into place, not a crown or a title, but the certainty that compassion had reshaped her fate, and that true strength, once unseen, now stood openly in the light.